Hi everyone, welcome to this tutorial. I'm Kate, the founder of Project Patterns. If you're new here, I'm a professional pattern cutter and I started Project Patterns as a place to share my love and enthusiasm for pattern cutting with all of you guys. So, I do a range of online courses, I do one-to-one lessons, and I do free tutorials like this one. Every month I pick a topic and I deep dive into that topic. This month we're talking about how we can use geometric shapes in our patterns. So I've already done a tutorial on how we can create a circular skirt, something a lot of you will be familiar with, but I wanted to think about how we can take that circle shape and push it a little bit further. Our circles don't have to be just around the waist, we can also put them around the neck like this. So our circle skirt looks like this when it's in half. Our pattern for this kind of garment, a little coat or a capelet, let's call it, is also a circle, just slightly different. The difference between our circle for our skirt and our circle for this capelet is that our neckline is a little bit different to fit our body, and we have cleverly placed little slits or cuts here that we stitch together to create our sleeve and our body shape. So, like I said, this is what we're going to be drafting today. We can see that it's obviously cut in calico, so it is a little bit pokey out, but can you imagine this in a beautiful crepe or something that just falls around the body? Gorgeous. I have a centre front opening here which will factor into our circle, and you can see here is where those little cleverly placed cuts are that are now stitched together. This is the simple form of this. You can of course work into this loads more. You don't have to keep all the volume here at the side seam and under the arm. You can take that away and taper it to the body a little bit more so that it becomes a little bit flatter there. Entirely up to you. This is just the starting point of how we take a circle and create this kind of capelet. You can do so many fun things with it. If you wanted to, you could even put a gusset in here. One thing we need to think about is our fabric width. Now, of course, I'm working in half scale, so I don't really have any restrictions on my fabric width. But if you're working in full scale, you might find that you do. Think about putting in seams in clever places. So somewhere like over the shoulder would be a good place to put a seam because you're not going to see it, it's just on the shoulder. Or you could put a seam at the centre back. Since you already have one at the centre front, you could cut your garment in a pair, so one half or two halves rather. Our pattern for our cape looks like this. Now it's really similar to our pattern for our circle skirt, but there's a couple of key differences. The first one is that we have these cleverly placed slits here which stitch together and form our underarm seams. Then we also have a different shape here in the middle for the hole, our neck hole essentially, which is quite different to the hole that we have in the middle of our skirt pattern for our waist. We also have a centre front seam here rather than a centre back seam on our circular skirt. So let's have a quick look at how we draft this pattern. Just like on our skirt draft, we fold our paper twice. So once in half and then once in half again. And the corner with all the folds is what's going to be the centre of our circle, so our neck hole essentially. Now again, just like in the skirt one, if you have fabric width issues, then you can of course put a seam, you could put a shoulder seam in here as well, but I'm doing this half scale, so I'm going to do it in one full circle. So if this is our neck here, then our centre front is going to be this edge and our shoulder is going to be this edge. Instead of drafting a proper circle like we did for our skirt, I'm instead going to use my basic bodice block to help me get the shape of my neckline so that it fits the body in a much nicer way. So first off, I'm going to take my bodice, I'm going to line up my centre fronts, and I'm going to drag it until my shoulder point hits what should be my shoulder line there. Then I'm just going to draw this in. Now again, guys, as always, I'm using pen so that you can see this really clearly. If you are doing this for yourself, you should be using a mechanical pencil, it's much more accurate. Okay, so that's my centre front neck. Now let's think about how long we want our cape to be. So on my body of my mannequin here, if I measure from my centre front neck down, 24 looks like a nice length for a little cape. So I'm going to do my length as 24. So measure from my centre front neck down 24 centimetres and make a little mark. And just like in the skirt, if you have a compass and you want to use a compass for this, then that's absolutely fine. When you start to get bigger pieces, compasses aren't big enough. If you have the standard size, you do of course get much larger ones, but standard size doesn't work. So I always use a piece of string like this with a little loop tied through the end. What I'm going to do is put my pen through the loop at the end, and then I'm going to use my awl to anchor my string down so that I can draw a little line with it. So pen through loop, putting my pen on the mark that I drew, and then anchoring down my ribbon here, right on the corner of my page there. Then I'm just going to use that to draw my circle shape in. Cool. So that's my basic circle. So next we want to think about where our cleverly placed cuts are going to be. I'm going to do my cuts directly in the middle of this half circle, or quarter circle rather. So if I just fold this back up again, that's going to be the line I do my cut on. But how far down do we want our cut to end? Let's have another look on our mannequin here. So our arm sits here, right? And our cut, or our little stitch seam thing that we're going to do here, goes from here all the way up to here somewhere. So if I measure from my shoulder point, it's kind of hard to do this while I was lying down, but from my shoulder point to roughly where I want my sort of slit to go up to, that's about 14. So then I can go from my shoulder point here and see where 14 gets me on this line. So gets me there. And if you're worried about your tape measure moving, you can also use a ruler to do this. Putting 0 on my ruler at my shoulder point, and then rotating my ruler until 14 hits that folded line. That's going to be how far my stitch goes. So then let's just draw on top of our folded line up to that point. And this is where we're going to cut and stitch to. Perfect, it's starting to look like we want it to. Okay, so we're not just going to cut straight along there, we want our back neck shape too. So I'm going to open this up. And if this is my center front, this edge here is my center back. Then I'm going to grab my basic bodice block for my back, and I'm going to do the same, putting my center back on my center back and matching up my shoulder points there. You'll see my centre back has a little bit extra length in there. That's quite common with blocks as well. So instead, I'm going to keep my centre back parallel. So it got more at the waist and more there, keeping my shoulder point. That's the important thing in this draft, that your shoulder point's in the right place. Then I'm going to draw through there. So I get my centre back neck. Fabulous. Okay, so now let's add some seam allowance. So on my hemline, I'm going to add 0.5. On my neck, I'm going to add 0.5 as well. And on our slit as well, we also need to add some seam allowance. So here I'm going to add 0.5 on either side. And I'm not going all the way to my drill hole here. You could make a square and stitch it in a square, but I'm going to stitch it as like a point, almost like a dart. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure down the same length, so 3 centimeters. And this is literally me just gauging what I think will look right. And then I'm going to draw this in. Lovely. So then I'll stitch along here, all the way up here, and then down there. And while we have this folded, let's put a little drill hole in there. So going through all my layers, let's see how sharp this is. Will it go through? Yes, all the layers are through. Fantastic. And I'll also put one here and here to show that that's where the straight stitching ends. I've not quite gone through all 4 layers there. There we go. Lovely. Okay, so then let's pin it together and pin or cut our hem rather. Then let's unpin this real quick. Oh, and actually, before we do too much, let's pin this together around this area. And let's just cut straight up our cut line there, all the way to our dad apex, or a seam apex. Then I'm going to open it up so that just my centre back and my centre front are on the fold. And then I'm going to quickly add some seam allowance here, and then we can cut out our neck hole as well. And of course, I really should have pinned that down to make sure it didn't move. Okay, so then if we open this up, ta-da, we have our full circle pattern. Our centre back is here and our centre front is here. And you can see we have all of our slits. And when we fold this at the shoulder, we're going to stitch up here so that this is together, and stitch here so that these are together. But we also want to create our centre front opening. So on my centre front, I'm just going to draw in that fold, and I'm going to add some seam allowance. So I'm going to add 0.5 either side. And then I'm going to cut up my centre front. So that then we've got our opening. Just like that, we have our cape pattern. So remember, we can add a seam at our shoulder, so exactly where this fold is here. We could have cut this and put a seam in here if we were trying to save fabric, or if we were restricted with our fabric width. So when we stitch this together, it looks like this. And you'll see this on the mannequin in a second, but what you might find you want to do is reduce some of the fullness just here. So you might want to try and do something a little bit more like this kind of shape, just because you end up having little flaps that stick out here. But honestly, to do this is so simple. All you would do is just measure how much you want to pin out. Let's say it's roughly about 5 centimeters. You would just simply redraw this line in here to your new apex. Add your seam allowance on here, and then trim that off so that your pattern would end up looking like that. So let's have a quick look at what this looks like on the mannequin. So remember, this is what our garment looks like when we've cut it out and twirled it. And like I said at the beginning of the tutorial, I've cut this in calico, so it is quite stiff and it does poke out a little bit. You might like that and want to cut yours in something stiff as well, or you might want a slightly softer look. Either way, totally fine. That's the best thing about making patterns. It's entirely up to you what you design. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, pop a comment below and like it. If you have an idea that you want to draft with a circle, let me know. I'd love to hear from you. In the meantime, you can find more of me on my website, projectpatterns.co.uk, or you can find me on Instagram @projectpatterns. See you later, guys. Bye.